Welcome back once again, Real People, Real Life, Wichita, Kansas, America. Right? And we have with us today Mr. Bill Zimmerman. He is an attorney here in Wichita, Kansas, located here in this beautiful building. What's the address again?
229 East William.
Nice building, by the way.
It is.
Very nice.
It's historic.
Yes, it is, and it's very easy to access too. Parking.
Yeah, I noticed that.
That was wonderful. We have a lot to ask you today.
Sure.
Tell us a little bit about yourself. You know, where you went to school, what type of law do you specialize in, and we'll just kind of go from there.
I graduated from law school in 1979 in Omaha. I went to Creighton and I practiced in Nebraska for 2 years in a small town where the nearest McDonald's was 60 miles away.
What? Wow.
Yeah, no stoplights. And I got an offer to come down here to work in a pilot program of the federal government called the United States Trustee's Office, which at the time was a kind of an experimental thing of implementing new bankruptcy laws and procedures that went into effect in 1978. So I moved here in fall of 1981, and 3 weeks later I was laid off by the federal government when President Reagan was reducing the federal budget. But
Wow,
it worked
history
out. It worked
lesson.
out. So, and I did a year at the DA's office, which was great. And then I went back into private practice with the gentleman who hired me here, and have practiced pretty much nothing but bankruptcy law ever since.
This whole time.
Mhm.
Who was the DA's office? Who was our district attorney?
Back
when you
then
worked
it
there?
was Clark Owens.
Okay.
Yeah. And it was a great learning experience. It was fun. I enjoyed it.
Right.
Good people. And a lot of trial practice. So
Right.
But since then I was an adjunct professor at WSU for about 20 years teaching
Wow.
bankruptcy law. And they no longer have the program out there, but I taught out at WSU and enjoyed
They
that.
still don't have that program?
No, they don't. They moved it. It was part of they had a legal assistant program, and they moved it out to Newman several years ago. And I was pretty busy, and I asked a friend of mine to take it over, and he did. So,
Okay.
so I haven't taught for several years, but I always enjoyed teaching also. It was a lot of fun.
I bet you would be great at that.
It was fun. I
Yeah.
enjoyed it. Yes.
I am gonna say one thing that I do know that a lot of people don't know about you is that you also were fantastic in radio.
Well, that's a long time ago. It was fun. I
It was
enjoyed
fun too.
Yeah, it was
Okay,
fun.
yeah.
It was when I was in school.
Right.
Yeah, that was fun.
So you were a partner, I think, right?
Yeah, I was a partner in a firm here for a long time, and we dissolved the firm a couple of years ago. No problems, no drama. We had a couple retirements and a couple other opportunities, so I elected to come over here and I practice of counsel to the firm I'm with now, which means I'm kind of not a consultant. That's not the right term. I'm kind of an independent contractor would be the better way to put it. But I still do what I do. I do bankruptcy work for small businesses, farms, ranches, people. I do some creditor work. I do represent some banks. Not very many, but I always have done some of that. I've been involved. I used to be a Chapter 7 trustee. My partner for years was a Chapter 7 trustee. So I've done a lot of trustee work, and I do a fair amount of stuff with real estate and bankruptcy and tax in bankruptcy.
Right.
But always bankruptcy related.
Tax is a big thing though when
Tax
you
is a
talk
big,
about
big
bankruptcy.
thing. Yeah, we do
Okay.
a lot of tax stuff.
All right.
And we can actually do something. Most people think you have taxes, they can't be discharged in bankruptcy. That is not true.
I did not know that.
Some income taxes can be discharged in bankruptcy. Another good use of bankruptcy is if you need time to pay taxes.
Right.
We can get people time to pay, and the IRS and state are usually very good to work with. They like it when people come into the system to get repaid.
Right.
It's just
To
easier.
work
It's
together.
easier for everybody if everybody's in and
Right.
within the system.
Right.
Yeah, that works real well.
Interesting.
So if you owe taxes, don't be afraid to talk to a bankruptcy lawyer. We may be able to help you.
Is that one of the common myths?
That's one of the myths. Yes, that
There are-
is.
Can we
There's a
get
lot of
some
myths.
more of
Yeah.
those
There are a lot of
myths?
myths. Let me ask you a question. How often can you file bankruptcy?
Good question.
Every 2 years.
No.
No.
Okay, well, that's just something I heard.
Okay, no. There's a.
Every 7 years.
Bingo.
Okay.
Correct. And that is
Medical bankruptcy?
no such thing. That's a
And
myth.
that's gone?
That's a myth?
That's a myth. But let's
Whoa.
go back to the 7 years.
Okay, and then can we
Most-
go back to
and then
medical
we'll go back to
bankruptcy?
medical
Okay,
bankruptcy.
all right.
Most people think and have always thought that you can only file bankruptcy every 7 years.
Right.
That is not true and never really has been true.
What? Is there a guideline?
Now, it used to be that you could file Chapter 7 bankruptcy every 6 years. Now, since 2005, you can file every 8 years. Would you like to know where the 7 years comes from?
Yes.
Yes.
The original bankruptcy law. Would you like to know where that was?
Yes.
The Old Testament, Deuteronomy.
Really?
Really?
Deuteronomy. That's where the original bankruptcy law was in the Old Testament. The Jubilee year, which was every 7 times 7 year, all debts were to be forgiven.
Wow.
And that is the origin of bankruptcy.
I would have never thought that. I would have
true.
never known that.
And through history, you can trace that. Through
Is
civilizations.
that also why,
have
like,
had-
legal criminal things, they used to say you only had a 7-year?
Could be. That I don't know, but I know that.
That's funny. It's always the number 7.
The history of bankruptcy, there are books written
So-
about this that are fascinating. You trace it right back to the Old Testament.
And now
Testament.
for bankruptcy, a Chapter 7 is every 8 years.
Yeah,
You're
Chapter
eligible.
7, yes.
Chapter
Now, there are
7.
other kinds of bankruptcies.
Yeah, there
Such
are
as
several.
medical.
No.
That's a myth.
That's a
Okay.
myth. There is no
How is that a
There
myth?
is no medical bankruptcy. Does not and has never existed.
Well, how is that possible? Because, okay, you would know this. I've always heard that, like, if your medical bills for treatments and stuff start getting outstanding, you can file bankruptcy on them every 2 years. That's something I've
That is
heard.
not, unfortunately, that is not true. There are about 5 things that commonly cause bankruptcy.
Okay.
And one of them is not, let's go to Vegas every weekend with our credit cards. We very, very rarely see that. Credit cards don't cause bankruptcy.
Credit cards don't?
Nope. What causes bankruptcy is typically some combination of illness, medical bills,
Okay.
layoffs,
Okay.
tax problems, divorce, and small business failures.
That's the most common cause of
Yeah, those
bankruptcy.
things put together. Now, the reason that people think credit cards cause bankruptcies are most people don't just go crazy with credit cards. Yeah,
Right.
they may use them, they may struggle with them, but they can keep the balls in the air as long as they're working. Married couple,
Income, yeah.
2 incomes, they can keep, they get the new car, they buy a house, they might buy a boat, they've got some credit cards, they can keep all the balls in the air until somebody gets laid off, somebody gets sick,
A business closes.
kids,
Divorce.
divorce, and now they can't keep the balls in the air.
And now they're
And
having
that's
to
what
pay for
causes
those things.
bankruptcy.
Right.
Because they used to be able to handle the house payment and the car payment and the credit card payments. But when they get divorced, they have 2 household, they have 2
Both have
rents.
to maintain.
They both have to maintain. If one of the kids gets sick and they get a big hospital bill, and it doesn't take much.
Right.
Somebody gets laid off, all of those things. It's always more than one. It's usually 2 or 3 of those things. Or they have a small business, and in order to make payroll and rent and expenses one month, they don't withhold, or they don't submit the withholding taxes, the sales taxes, the withholding taxes. Ooh, that was easy, let's do it again next month. And all of a sudden,
Before they know it, yeah.
they can't catch those up, and the government takes a very dim view of that. That's other people's money, so.
Right, we've had a couple of businesses
Right.
in the Old Town area, and I'm not gonna name names by any.
It's
no, I
very
won't do
common.
that. Yeah.
It's
but
very
they-
common.
Both of these facilities went, obviously several months without paying their employment taxes.
Right.
Tens and tens and tens of thousands, $50,000, $60,000.
That's a good way to get closed.
Right. What type of a bankruptcy situation would they be looking at to help prolong the payment?
Well, they do a reorganization.
That is
For a corporation or an LLC, it'd be a Chapter 11.
Okay.
For an individual, it'd be a Chapter 13. And then typically, we see a lot of those. They want to stay in business. The business is viable, but the government is literally about to padlock their doors, which they will do if they feel the need.
I've seen that happen to a couple of businesses.
Yeah, it does happen. They try not to. They try to work with people, but they just can't let that go too far because it is other people's money.
Right.
It's not the owner's money. It's other people's money.
Right.
So those are the things typically that will cause a business to have to reorganize, to get time to pay taxes.
Okay, I know that we're going to have to take a break here in about a minute or so, but so far there's 3 types that we've just briefly kind of glossed over. One would be the Chapter 7, a Chapter 11,
Right.
and then a Chapter 13. Are
Right.
there other?
There are others.
Wow.
Is there one through these numbers?
No,
I mean,
no, there's
There's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6,
Chapter
7.
7 is what people think of as bankruptcy.
Okay.
It's the start over. It's the fresh start. You stubbed your toe, you need to start over. That's the classic bankruptcy. Chapter 11 is the classic business reorganization that the big companies do. Chapter 13 is like a kind of a cousin to Chapter 11, but it's for individuals.
Okay.
They used to call them wage earner plans. That's kind of an archaic term.
Yeah.
They're for people who want to restructure their debts, maybe pay a percentage of what they owe back. There are several formulas we have to use to determine how much is paid back, but they're very useful. It's how we stop foreclosures on houses and let people try to keep their house. There's also Chapter 9, which is for municipalities or state. It's for
Really?
government entities. Very rare. Orange County, California
Right.
filed one. I don't know that there have ever been any filed in Kansas. Chapter 12, which is for farmers, ranchers, and commercial fishermen. We do some of those. We have farms and ranchers and commercial fishermen in Kansas. And there's now something called a Chapter 15, which is an international bankruptcy. And those are seen primarily in major, New York,
Huge.
Chicago.
Right.
We don't get those. We don't see those.
Okay.
So really, 7 and 13 make up 95% of the bankruptcies filed in Kansas.
Wow. Okay, we have got to take a really, really quick break.
Okay.
And we're going to be right back
because I do have a question for you.
We got a lot more. Okay.
Okay.
We'll be back in just a minute. Real People, Real Life, Wichita, Kansas. Welcome back once again, Real People, Real Life, Wichita, Kansas, America. We will have you doing that before this is over. In the last segment, we talked about the types of bankruptcies that we are aware of. One being the Chapter 7, Chapter 9, Chapter 11, Chapter 13, Chapter 12, Chapter 15. But the ones that you see mostly here in Wichita are Chapter 7, 11, and 13. Is that correct?
Right. Well, that's true everywhere in the country. I mean,
Okay.
that's
Yeah.
very, very few lawyers ever deal with Chapter 12.
Yeah.
We see them in Kansas because of the
Farms.
nature of our economy.
Right.
But most attorneys have never seen a Chapter 12. Municipal or state bankruptcies are extremely rare. That's Chapter 9, and Chapter 15 is relatively new for international things, and we just
Don't really see that
so
much.
the vast majority of cases filed around the country are Chapter 7 and 13. Chapter 11 there are a lot of Chapter 11s. They tend to be concentrated in bigger financial markets such as New York and Delaware,
Right.
because so many big corporations
Hub there.
have their domicile
Right.
in Delaware. So we see them. The ones we see typically are not. They're for smaller businesses. For example, when Wraith or Beechcraft filed,
Right.
that was filed in New York. It wasn't filed here.
Really?
Mhm.
Okay. I didn't know
And that's
that.
well, it's a different world. Those are
Yeah.
extremely complex cases.
Oh,
And
sure.
most law firms, our clerk's office, which is wonderful to work with here, they just aren't really set up to deal with a case like that because they need extra resources
A
to
lot of
just
resources.
manage all the information. They're huge cases,
Oh, wow.
thousands and thousands.
You know, I have a question for you about the myths, okay? I wonder if this is a myth. I have 2. All right, number 1, when you file bankruptcy, a lot of people think that you're just going to get to write off all that debt. That's not true. You actually do have to pay money or settlements or
No,
agreements.
in Chapter 7 you don't.
You don't?
No.
It just takes care of it all?
It
Do you get to
takes
keep
care
your
of
property?
Okay, hold that thought.
Hold on, honey. Yeah.
First of all, normally in Chapter 7, you don't pay anything back except on, say for example, your house. If you want to keep your house, you have to make your house payment. If you want to keep your car and it's subject to a loan, you have to make the car loan payment.
But the amounts due at that
No,
point?
they don't change. Those payments stay the same. You make your house payment just as it is, you keep your house. make your car payment just as it is, you can keep your car. Now, it gets complicated because each state has its own property laws. There's no federal property law. And bankruptcy is a federal court action. There's a reason that I'm going to come back to in a second. So in some states, like Kansas, which was, at the time we became a state in 1861, a very liberal, progressive state. We actually were until the 1890s, when there was a recession and the politics changed somewhat. And since then, Kansas is famously very conservative politically. But until then, Kansas was actually thought of as one of the very progressive states in the country. And in our state constitution, there is protection, for example, for your home. If you own your home free and clear in Kansas, the bankruptcy court, creditors, someone who gets a judgment against you, and the bankruptcy trustee cannot take your home away from you. It doesn't matter if it's $1 million house. They can't take it away from you.
Wow.
Now,
I did not know that.
move across a state line, and it's completely different. In some states, there's very little protection because of the state laws are very old. Typically, the western states are more progressive, and the eastern states, with some exceptions, are more conservative because their laws are older. Florida happens to have laws a lot like ours, but Georgia is completely different. And every state is different, so you have to be very careful if you're going online to research bankruptcy law and say, okay, what happens in this? It depends on what state you're in, because it's state by state, it's different, even though bankruptcy law is the same. If you're in Maine or South Dakota or Florida or Washington, the bankruptcy law is the same because it's federal law. But how it works in each state is completely different.
Wow.
So you have to be real
I didn't
careful
know
about
that.
that. Yeah, it's unique to our practice. Now, I was going to tell you something, I forgot my train of thought. You'd asked me about...
Well, real quick, can those people come after you if you filed bankruptcy?
What people?
Well,
you own
people
real
that you
estate.
owe,
Credit-
creditors.
No, once you file a bankruptcy, the second you file bankruptcy, it is illegal for creditors to contact you.
Oh.
And the judges are very, very strict about that.
Oh.
It is designed, what bankruptcy is designed to level the playing field for all the creditors, have an orderly liquidation of the debtor's assets. Now, here in Kansas, most people don't have anything that the bankruptcy trustee can take away from it. For example, as I said, the equity in your home is protected. You're entitled to a vehicle worth up to $20,000.
Really?
They can't take away, right. Most states it's $1,500 or $2,000. All your furniture, your appliances, your household goods of a reasonable, that's the legal term here, value, are protected. They can't take those away. In some states, you only get $1,500 or $3,000 of furniture, appliances, clothing, what have you.
Are you serious?
Oh, would you have to pick, would you like your washer and dryer or your refrigerator?
Well, literally, I mean,
Wow.
in some states, literally the bankruptcy trustees will go out to people's houses and go through their houses. Here, we don't do that. There are limitations. Jewelry in Kansas is $1,000 per person.
Us two girls
can,
went
What if
out.
it's grandma's ring?
doesn't matter. Grandma's ring, there's no special protection. Some states have special protection for wedding rings. Oklahoma does. We don't. But we tend to use low values because realistically, when you go to sell used jewelry, it doesn't.
It's not much.
Yeah, it's not worth what you think
pennies on a
it
dollar usually.
is. What you do lose, and let me, before I get away from it, retirement funds, pensions, IRAs, 401ks, the right to receive military pensions, Social Security, those are all protected also.
Okay.
And that's true most places.
Okay, that's good to know.
Now, what isn't protected are things like money in your bank account.
They can take your money in your bank.
Yes. So
Even
that's
if-
true. That's here. Now, in some states, there's a protection for it. Here, there isn't.
Is that checking account, savings?
Checking, savings, right. So you have to be careful.
What about
that.
CDs?
CDs, same way. But your IRA is protected. But your boat,
No resting.
your
My
jet
boat's
ski,
protected?
your motorcycle is not protected.
No, your boat is not protected.
No, your Harley is not protected.
Mm-hmm.
Unless
It's your only form of transportation?
it's your regular means of transportation, your regular means of conveyance, in which case it is. In Kansas, you could claim a boat as your vehicle. You could claim an airplane as long as it's worth less than
I
$20,000.
don't know too many airplanes worth less than
No.
$20,000 that I would want to get on.
That I would fly.
Yeah, I would fly, yeah.
The exemption used to be unlimited.
So they can
Oh, wow.
make you liquidate?
Yes, yes.
I'm sorry, I'm going to rephrase that.
Mhm.
So they can make you give up everything?
No, you keep your house, your furniture, your appliances, your car, your clothing.
Your necessities.
Yeah, and that's, when you look at it, that's the entire.
Oh, because you want to
purpose
even the
behind
playing
law.
ground once again.
Well, yeah, I mean, the law was designed to say, okay, people need a certain amount of necessity or they can't function
Correct.
in life. And that's where our laws come from. Now, in some states, they're very restricted. We happen to have a very liberal exemption.
Liberal.
Exemption is the legal term. Our exemptions are very, very liberal, and the law is, you can take advantage of that within reason. But the moral of all this is you want to be very careful about it. If you're watching this in Tennessee,
Right.
the law is a lot different. The law in Kentucky is different. The law in North Dakota is different. It is state by state.
I want to ask you something.
Wow.
I know you have another question too. I know we both have a lot of questions, but something that kind of drives me nuts is on Facebook, for example. You'll see people that maybe are a clerk. They don't actually practice law. They are not considered an attorney.
Right.
Maybe they're a law clerk or
A consultant.
A consultant seems to be a big word these days. And so they put these ads on Facebook. Bankruptcies starting at $199. That scares me.
Well, there have been abuses of that. There are some very strict requirements for what are called petition preparers in the bankruptcy law, that if it's not illegal to do it within reason,
Right.
it's not illegal to help someone prepare a bankruptcy petition, but you can't cross the line and give legal advice. And if you do that, there are certain disclosures you have to make or you're violating federal law. And the agency that is in charge of that does go out and investigate and can prosecute people for doing that if they don't comply with the law. Let me give you an example.
Please.
You could obviously list in a form what you own. I own a house located at 123 Main Street. I think it's worth $60,000. I own a 2005 Ford. It's worth $5,000. I own furniture, appliances, clothing. Okay, so far so good, right? There's nothing legal about that.
Right.
Okay, which of those are exempt under Kansas law? Now you've crossed the line.
That easily.
Mhm.
Oh,
That's
Yeah, because
Oh,
that's
boy.
illegal, you probably didn't know what was exempt until 10 minutes ago when we
No,
started
you're
talking
absolutely
about it.
correct.
Okay, so you wouldn't have the background to say, well, you should choose this as your exempt vehicle and not that because you're not licensed to do that. Okay, I'm not licensed
Wow.
to do certain things, and that's generally where the lines are drawn.
Man, I know we got to take another break. We could probably spend all
We do?
afternoon with you.
Well, I understand.
This is amazing. Okay, we are so not even close to being done. We're going to be right
Now,
back.
when
Wait.
we come back,
Yeah.
ask me about how you pay for bankruptcies,
Okay, how do you pay for it? I will.
because that's what we're talking about now.
Yes,
You got it.
absolutely.
We'll be right back. Real People, Real Life, Wichita, Kansas. Welcome back once again, Real People, Real Life, Wichita, Kansas.
America.
America! I already quietly said it. Okay. Once again, joining us today is Mr. Bill Zimmerman, attorney at law who does specialize in bankruptcy law. And I have learned so much already, but we're not done learning yet.
Yeah, before the end of the last
Question.
segment, you
Question.
said to make sure to ask you, and so it's really kind of a good question. If you're bankrupt and you can't pay your bills, how is the bankruptcy paid for?
Right.
Good
It's a
question.
good question. It's one of the great questions of bankruptcy law. Nobody comes to us because they have too much money.
Right.
But With the way most bankruptcy, and this is for people, I mean, these are for
Just for people,
the
not
regular
businesses.
kind of
Right,
business
okay.
bankruptcies. Are
Right,
totally
different.
Most people need a Chapter 7 or a Chapter 13. Around the country, the practice is pretty much the same. The fees will vary a little, but the practice is the same. Chapter 7s are always done on what are called flat fees. In other words, it's
Okay.
$1,500 for a Chapter 7, beginning with the first meeting with the client, finishing with when they get their discharge and everything's wrapped up. Or $2,000.
So about how much
$1,000.
time does that
Yeah.
take? Does it depend?
Every case is different.
Okay.
Every case is different. But we don't charge by the hour. There are a couple of reasons for that. One is practical and one is legal. Practically speaking, people don't need surprises. And we don't want them to be afraid to call us because they know they're going to get a bill for the phone call.
Right.
So it eliminates that problem. The other thing is legal. The way the law is written and the way the Supreme Court has interpreted it, it actually is illegal for us to take a bankruptcy, a Chapter 7 bankruptcy, and say, pay me $500 to start, and then you can pay me later, because the second we file bankruptcy, we are a creditor. We are treated exactly like a credit card or a medical bill or a deficiency. So it puts us in a conflict with our client.
Right.
And so to avoid that, now, do attorneys do that? Yeah, they probably do.
Yeah.
We're trying to help people.
Right.
But realistically, we ask for the fee up front because it eliminates that difficulty, both legal and practical.
Right.
We get a lot of cases in the spring that are paid for from tax refunds. We get a lot of cases paid for by relatives or friends.
Right.
You know, we get a lot of cases that are paid for just because they have to scrimp and save, and we understand that.
Right.
But unfortunately, the law is set up that way, and that's the way it is.
That's what it is.
There is a way around it,
Okay.
and a lot of people don't realize this and don't take advantage of it, and that's Chapter 13. Because in Chapter 13, it is a payment plan. By definition, you make a payment every month to the court, we are allowed to be paid out of that.
Right.
So typically, in most areas, Chapter 13 practice has been a growing practice
I bet.
because people can more readily afford it. It's easier to get into. You don't need as much up front, and you can pay us over time through the court proceedings. And we see people file pro se Chapter 13s, meaning they're doing it by themselves, which is silly because it's not hard to get a lawyer to take your Chapter 13 case, assuming you have the ability to pay the payment as you go.
Right.
And most people, if they're working steady, can do that.
Can do that.
It doesn't mean you have to pay back all your bills or
Right.
all your debt. You don't.
Right.
Usually you pay a small percentage of that.
And in that Chapter 13, the monthly payment is mostly in secured debt items. Is that the right term?
Not really.
Versus, okay, work with me on that because
Okay.
people don't understand, when they get into that Chapter 13, but wait a minute, why do I have to pay for these things? But these things over here are considered non-secured. I'm not sure.
Well, it's a little more complicated.
Okay, thank you.
In Chapter 13, if you want to keep your house, you make your house payment. If you're behind and the mortgage company is foreclosing, we can stop the foreclosure and allow you to catch up the missed payments over time,
Wow.
even though the mortgage company won't work with you outside of bankruptcy. Okay. And that payment is made through the bankruptcy. Sometimes we can change car payments. For example, if you owe $10,000 on a car that's really worth $5,000 and you bought it several years ago, we can actually re-amortize the loan so where you're paying $5,000
Wow.
rather than $10,000.
Wow.
There's restrictions on
Yeah,
that,
okay.
but that's typically
possible,
something we
okay.
do.
Really? I know.
And the payments are based, so the payments are somewhat based on how much your secured debts are
Okay.
and what you want to keep. They're also based on a function of your budget and literally just how much do you make, how much do you spend, what's left over. That's always been a major component of how Chapter 13 payments are computed. There's a third formula which is very artificial, came into effect in 2005 when the bankruptcy laws were changed. And it's very technical and every case is different.
Right.
And there's no way to explain it. It's just,
Yeah.
it's very
A
artificial.
per case situation.
It's based on your previous 6 months income and a bunch of IRS expense calculations.
Yay.
So So, that's the third way. And then the fourth thing we look at is the value of property you're keeping that you'd otherwise lose in a Chapter 7. For example, if you have a business and you have business property that would be lost in Chapter 7, you can propose to keep the business and pay creditors the equivalent of what they would have gotten in Chapter 7 through the Chapter 13 payments. So you
What?
keep your business.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
How long is it,
About 3 to 5 years.
3 to 5 years? I wonder.
That's set by law.
Okay.
What is 3 to 5
The
years?
payment
The
plan.
payment plan
Oh.
for
Yeah.
Chapter 13.
Minimum 3 years, maximum 5
Oh.
years. And the variable, there are a lot of variables.
There's a lot of
Yeah, there are a
variables.
lot of variables, yeah.
So this just kind of reinforces though something that Fossa, Michelle Farner, and I talk about sometimes when we see these ads and people say, I can handle your bankruptcy for anywhere from $199 to sometimes $299. I've seen different prices, but I
No.
think that the best
No.
thing they can do is to call you.
Well, yeah. I mean,
That's for
it-
bankruptcies.
Yeah,
But-
I mean, it's kind of the old, if you're 2/3, do you take it out yourself? No.
Good.
If your appendix hurts, do you take it out
No.
yourself? No. Do we charge for our service? Of course.
Well, of course.
Of course, that's how we make our living, that's how we pay the overhead.
Right.
Bankruptcy lawyers tend to be fairly pragmatic because realistically our clients don't have a lot of money. We understand that.
Right.
But we have overhead and we have to make a living also. But don't be afraid to approach a bankruptcy lawyer because you've heard that lawyers are expensive and, don't be afraid of that. Because
Right.
the truth is a lot of people come to us too late.
Yeah.
For example, somebody who is terrified of getting collection call. They have a number of credit cards. Their husband died a few years ago, and they had a bunch of credit cards, and the widow can't live on Social Security and the pension anymore because it's the old 2-person income, and now
Right.
they don't have all that. And she's never taken care of the finances. He always did that. And she gets calls from 9 o'clock in the morning until 9 o'clock at night. And she gets terrified and takes money out of her IRA to pay a credit card. Well, the IRA is protected by law. The credit card company can't get to it, but she does what she perceives as the right thing and pays a debt. But she still has other debts that she can't pay, and now she has no savings. Yeah, we see things like that. And I'm not saying debts shouldn't be paid, they should be paid. But
Things happen.
Things happen.
and that is the ultimate statement of bankruptcy. Things happen. Let me pose you another question, because we're in that balance between, honest people pay their debts, dishonest people don't. Now, where does the bankruptcy law in the United States come from?
Federal government.
Federal government. Which came first? The Bill of Rights, the First Amendment, freedom of speech, Second Amendment, right to bear arms, or bankruptcy law? Which came first?
Wow.
Did bankruptcy come first?
Yep.
Holy moly!
Really?
Under,
Article 1 of the original Constitution provides for a bankruptcy law.
Because things happen.
Because nobody in their right mind would come to a new country, start a business, and the penalty for failure was debtor's prison like in England.
whoa.
So the Founding Fathers knew that there had to be an organized commercial bankruptcy law because in order to start a business, they needed to extend protection to somebody who would do so. That's why we have bankruptcy law.
Wow.
Oh, I
that's
did
crazy.
not know that.
So bankruptcy law is older than the right to bear arms.
Wow.
Wow.
True.
Oh my, I've known Bill for so long, it's not funny, right? And he has always, always taught me so much for one thing, but for another thing, he knows the law, okay? And even though he may not practice other forms of law, okay, if I have a problem or if I have a question or if I have a situation and I say, okay, Mr. Zimmerman, here's what's going on. Well, I know you don't practice that type of law, but what can you do? And what do you do when something happens like that?
Well, we try to get, more and more lawyers are more special, just like doctors, we're specialized.
Right.
And we try to get somebody who can help them.
Right.
It makes no sense for me to take on a medical malpractice case because I don't know anything about it.
Exactly.
And I'd be kidding you if I told you I did. I
Yeah.
don't. but I can get you to somebody who does.
Right.
And medical malpractice people don't do bankruptcy.
Right.
So, yeah, and just like doctors. I mean, an oral surgeon doesn't do
Feet.
feed. Yeah, I mean,
Exactly.
they just don't do that. So,
No.
so we're no different.
I do have a question, and I guess we're going to have to probably go pay some bills and come back and get to it. But when we come back, I'd like to talk about credit scores, okay? Because I believe
Yes.
that there are some myths in that as well.
Major myths about credit scores.
Like your credit score goes down every time you check it. Is
That's
that a
true.
myth?
That's
That is
actually
true.
That's not necessarily true, but I know if you check it too much, it apparently affects your credit score.
Really? We're going to go ahead
We've
and
got so much more to get to.
yeah, we'll get to credit scores and the benefits and the wow, why it's good, why it's not.
Not even done yet, guys. So we'll be right back. Real people, real life. Wow. Welcome back once again. Wow.
We're
Real
still in
people-
America.
We're still in America. Say America. America. Ah, you did it. Okay. Once again, joining us. Still, this is so much to talk about. Mr. Bill Zimmerman, attorney at law here in Wichita, Kansas, specializing in bankruptcy, which seems to
Yeah.
be a big one these days.
And when we left at the last of the last segment, we were going to talk about some of the myths of your credit score. Like one of them being, I never knew if it was true or not. If you like go and apply for a credit card at like a department store or something, or if you yourself check it, it can actually make your credit score go down, but not. No, what were you saying about that?
Apparently, if you get too many inquiries on your credit, in other words, you apply for too many loans, that can adversely affect your credit score. We understand that. We don't know exactly how or how much, because credit scores are simply a company's, a computer's opinion of your creditworthiness based on public records and what information the network that each of the three companies that do them can obtain. And actually the credit score, most of the credit scoring in the country is called FICO, F-I-C-O, which is short for the Fair Isaac Company, who started doing this. But there's no law that says if you have this, this, and this in your background, your credit score has to be that. That doesn't exist.
Really?
Credit scores are simply this
Made up
computer
thing.
algorithm that this company has
Yeah.
devised, that the banks and the credit companies bought into and accept. In the old days, when I started to practice in the late 70s, there was no such thing.
Yeah.
Each local community had a credit bureau, and they kept track locally of records. And if a bank or a credit union or a car dealer or whomever, furniture store, wanted to extend somebody credit, they checked with the credit bureau and said, have you got anything negative against this person? Have they been sued, or their judgments, or their tax liens, divorces? And the credit bureau would say, yes, did, or no, they look okay, fine. Well,
How's that?
that all changed. And the banks and the mortgage lenders, since they all became centralized, started to use this national credit scoring agency. And in the last 20 years or so, this credit score has become
To live and
the
die by.
800-pound gorilla in the corner.
Right.
Exactly.
That's it.
Now-
The old days of lending across the table don't exist anymore.
No, they don't.
It all changed.
Yeah, so now people that are filing bankruptcy, I mean, obviously if they're falling behind, it's already affecting
It's
their
yeah.
credit score.
It-
Does filing bankruptcy also add to that effect?
Okay. What I tell people, a lot of people come in and are very concerned about their credit score. And what I tell people is, look, if you're here because you need my services, your credit score is the least of your problems.
Correct.
Chances are, it used to be good and you could get enough credit that now you can't pay. It's not always true. You could have a lot of medical bills, for example. But it isn't going to get any better without doing something, and it probably isn't going to get much worse if you file bankruptcy. It's going to bottom out, and after the bankruptcy, it will come up.
Right.
And it does come up. It takes a year or two or three, but it does come up. But without filing the bankruptcy, it isn't going to come up because you're still out there with judgments and lawsuits and garnishments and collections and those kinds of things, and those adversely affect your credit. So the model that we see suggests that file the bankruptcy, 2 years later, assuming you're still working, you've been making
Right.
your car payment, you've been making your house payment, you'll have decent credit. Won't be
Okay.
perfect, but it'll be
Very
decent enough that you can buy a new car, you can buy a new house, assuming you have the income and everything else is
Right.
within, because you don't have any debt, the debt's all
The
gone.
debt's gone,
Yeah.
right?
So,
Okay, so what I'm taking from this, if somebody wanted to come and file for bankruptcy, it's a set fee?
On a chapter
it's,
7.
yeah, chapter 7, we evaluate their situation. How many creditors do they have? Do they have 5 or 500? Do they have tax problems? Do they have a business? Do they have complicating factors, or is it pretty simple? 10 credit cards, a mortgage, a car loan. You know, they just stubbed their toe, they got laid off for 6 months, they got behind, the credit cards accelerated the interest, and they can't catch up. Versus they've had 2 businesses, they have huge tax liens, they have leases, they have equipment leases, they have machinery. They're apples and oranges, so I'll quote the fee accordingly. Again, this is geographic. Bankruptcies in California and New York are going to cost more than they do in Iowa and Kansas and Nebraska. Just our rents are cheaper,
Right.
our cost of living is
Right.
a little cheaper. Typically in the Wichita market, a Chapter 7 is going to cost between $1,200 to $2,000, $1,200 to $2,000.
And that
Might
has
be-
to be paid before,
Yes.
because you become a
Most-
creditor.
Most lawyers would
Okay.
require you to pay that up front.
And a
In
13,
Chapter 13, the court here, all courts around the country have adopted what they call a no-look fee. In other words, we'll accept this fee as a reasonable fee for a typical Chapter 13 that's going to last 3 to 5 years. Things are going to happen. There's going to be births and deaths, and the car,
Right.
you're going to hit a deer, and you're going to have to replace your car, and somebody's going to get laid off, and you know there'll be all kinds of stuff going on in there. And the judge, our judges here say $3,000 is a reasonable fee. Of that, I will require between $500 and $1,000 for a typical case to be filed. If it's a really, really complicated case, it may be more. If I'm doing I will discount my fee sometimes in certain cases, because I have people come to me who really are living in poverty and really have problems. Fine. So those are adjustable. That's the standard fee. In Topeka, it's pretty much the same. In Tulsa, it's pretty much the same. In Omaha, it's pretty much the same. That's a pretty good ballpark. I'm guessing, I don't know, I'm guessing if you go back to the East Coast in more populated states, it might be 4,000 or 5,000. But that's typical. That's every area, every bankruptcy area, and there's bankruptcy courts in the major cities. Every place has its own fee schedule, and they're all
Right.
pretty much the same.
now let's say somebody had some questions about bankruptcy. What does it take to set up a consultation? Is there a consultation fee? I mean, how does all that work?
Well, that's a good question. Some lawyers don't charge consultation fees, some do. If they do, they typically apply that to whatever the retainer requirement is going to be. So for example, if someone calls me and says, I have a business, I owe some tax, I think I may need a bankruptcy, I will say there will be a fee for that, but it will apply to whatever you need to go
Services.
forward. Right,
Right.
it's not like you pay it and then you come back and you start over. I don't really know what the standard on that is. Everybody does that kind of their own way. It's easy to give free advice. Most people that come to you are pretty sincere. And what I typically tell people is, I'm going to charge you $75 or $100. I'm going to listen, and within an hour I'll figure out what you need to do. If I solve your problems, I've taken care of your problem. 90% of the people, 95% of the people, I don't solve their problems. I say, okay, yeah, you need a bankruptcy. So why don't you pay me for my time today? Go get your debt counseling, which is required. Come back, and then we'll decide then if it's going to be a Chapter 7, a Chapter 13, what the fee will be, and whatever you've paid me today applies to that.
Okay,
About 25% of the people that come in need a Chapter 7 because they just don't have any options.
Right.
About 25% need a 13 because they simply make too much to do a 7, or they want to keep their house.
Everything. Right.
About 50% are either, they're in the middle.
Right.
They may go 7, they may go 13, and we just don't know when they come in.
Right.
We don't have enough information.
Who does this debt counseling?
Yeah, I was gonna say, what's that? And can the average Joe do that, or do you have to be in trouble?
Starting in 2005, Congress mandated that you have to go to an approved debt counselor before you can file bankruptcy. To do a debt
I knew there
counseling
had been a lot
course.
of changes.
Yeah, and they are accredited. You have to be
In trouble?
licensed, and that's not the right
Oh.
term. You have to be approved by the United States Trustee's Office. In Wichita, we have a good, legitimate nonprofit agency that does that. I send my clients there. It's called Consumer Credit Counseling. There were
Wow.
agencies like that in most places in the country. Since 2005, there are a lot of other startups, some of whom are very good and
questionable
professional.
too.
Very professional.
Okay.
Some of them are just rip-offs.
Right. Okay.
So if you go on the internet, you got to do your
Your
homework.
math, yeah.
Yeah, you have to be careful because
Okay.
some of them are very good and some of them aren't.
I know again. Gosh, God.
Did you say the average Joe can go and do that before they're in trouble? Like if they wanna,
Oh yeah, you can always go. Sure. I mean, the consumer credit counseling people they're there
available
to
to
give,
the general public?
absolutely. Oh, absolutely. They're nonprofit. That's what they're for.
Wow.
Yeah. No,
But
they're.
before you can enter into a bankruptcy, you definitely have
Yeah,
to
you
go.
have to go. to
Right,
the-
right, it's a requirement.
Yes, they issue you what amounts to a license to file bankruptcy.
Wow.
You cannot do it. A consumer bankruptcy cannot
Oh.
be filed without that.
Okay, I know
Wow.
that I want to come back and do another show. I'm just shocked that Kansas was
So much
liberal at some point
information.
and progressive.
It really
I did not
was.
know that.
When we were territory, we really
We were-
And our
Liberal and
laws that are in
progressive.
place still are.
Yeah, the law,
Yeah.
Well, that's nice.
the territorial constitution, the Wyandotte Constitution of 1857, I think, is what became the state constitution in 1861. That was back in the old, free state, slavery state. That was
Right.
back in those days.
Right? Okay. I know that people are going to have a lot of questions.
Yes.
And we hope that we got some of those answered for you today. But if we did not, Bill, how can people get a hold of you?
Well, my office is here in downtown Wichita, 262-5500. I've been downtown since 1981 doing this. So feel free to give me a call. We're on the internet. You can Google me.
I always
Google me.
I'm not the biggest internet guy. I have to admit, I'm really not. But
I always had your
But,
old number
yeah.
saved in my brain,
Right.
and I'm not going to go there. But
Yeah.
the new number, say it really loud one more time for me.
316-262-5500.
Put that in your phone, kids, seriously, because you never know when you're going to need to talk to this guy right here.
Yeah. We have a lot of people. Many people come in and say they're in tears. This is
Yeah, I
the
know.
last place I ever expected to be. I'm so embarrassed. That's very typical.
I know.
Yeah, we
There's
can-
nothing to be embarrassed
No,
about.
there
Things
isn't.
happen.
Things happen.
We can all trip and fall face first. You just never know when it's going to be
Yep.
your turn to do that.
That's right.
Bill, thank you very much.
Good to see
As
you.
always, it's good to see you. Thank
and
you.
it was really nice meeting you.
Thank
I learned
you.
a great deal today.
So did I.
Good.
Okay, we'll see you guys again here pretty soon with another Real People, Real Life Wichita,
Bye,
Kansas.
Mom. Bye, Julius.
Love y'all.